Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see such a full house. Was not expecting this, I got to be honest. So this is a good thing. Thank you for being here. Welcome, of course. Today is Thursday, November 9th, and we are having a special meeting for our Housing Pledge Workshop. This special meeting of Woodstock City Council is called for the purpose of identifying density strategies to include in the City of Woodstock's Housing Pledge. This meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube channel, and a recording will be posted on the city's website following the meeting. An agenda of the meeting, as well as the presentations we will be seeing today, can be found on the agendas, meetings, and minutes page of the city's website. I'd like to remind the public that this is not a public meeting. This is for council. Council will be asking staff members. There's going to be participation between staff members and council. Just please stay quiet. Please make notes, take notes. Feel free to send us any messages you have of ideas, concerns, anything whatsoever. That's the whole purpose of this. And again, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. Before I pass it over to Mr. Curry to get us started, I'm looking for a motion to rise and go into committee of the whole. Councillor Lauder, seconded by Councillor Schattenberg. All those in favor? Okay, we are in a meeting of the whole. Mr. Creary, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council. Okay. A little close. Members of the public. Very good to see such an interest in this topic. So we have an agenda here. We're going to start off with an introduction and a meeting overview. You're going to have a presentation by a variety of city and county staff, and then we'll move into an exercise for council to help build vision goals and a discussion on potential tools, initiatives, and strategies. So background. So Woodstock's journey to the meeting here today really began on June 16th with a letter from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing requesting that the City of Woodstock establish a housing target, and requesting Woodstock to develop a municipal housing pledge to be submitted by December 15th, 2023. Now, this request was amended on August 23rd, when during AMO, the Premier introduced a new $1.2 billion Building Faster Fund and amended the request to the City of Woodstock to actually assign the City of Woodstock a housing target, whereas before they just asked us to establish one. On the 23rd, the province assigned us a housing target of 5,500 dwelling units between now and 2031. The province maintained the request to submit a housing pledge to chart how Woodstock could achieve that housing target by December 15th. And that's really what brings us here today, to discuss the development of the municipal housing pledge. I would ask council to consider this a brainstorming session to develop ideas, initiatives that could be written into the municipal housing pledge. The housing pledge will be brought to City Council at its December 14th council meeting for council's consideration. Now, you'll be looking at a number of initiatives here and hopefully bringing forward a number of initiatives and tools that we can potentially implement to accelerate the development of new housing. But we aren't making any decisions today. We are simply brainstorming. Some of the ideas that you will discuss will include amendments to the City of Woodstock zoning bylaw, as well as the County of Oxford's official plan. Decisions cannot be made in those bylaws and policies without statutory process being completed. And we're not in a position to do that today. You'll also consider potential service level changes to address issues that could arise from the densification, the intensification of our residential units within the city. Those service levels are not something that we would expect council to approve in a meeting today. It's something that you would consider in the upcoming budget process. And so with that, we will walk through this with council this afternoon. So we just want to talk about some of the terms we're going to use. Gentle density is a term that's being used quite often in municipalities that are working to develop these housing pledges. And it's ways to create infill development within existing built-up neighborhoods that complement the existing neighborhoods, but yet result in greater densities. The housing target is the number that's been now assigned to the city by the province for new homes that they want to see constructed by 2031. And by homes, that's dwelling units. So that can be, it can be an apartment, it can be a condominium, it can be a townhouse, it can be a detached single family home, it can be any one of those. That is a dwelling unit. The housing pledge is the document that will outline the strategies and tools that the city council will direct in order for us to work towards achieving that housing target. So the official plan is a planning instrument. It is a policy document. It is under the jurisdiction of the County of Oxford. And the official plan essentially guides how development will take place across the entire county. It is the document that dictates how the zoning bylaw should read. The zoning bylaw is the actual regulatory document that specifies through regulations how we implement official plan policies. So zoning is really the detail of what's permitted on a property, what are the setbacks that are required for any structures or buildings that are built on that property, and what are the parking requirements. So housing start is defined as the beginning of construction on a building where the dwelling will be located. Next slide. So the housing pledge has a number of components. Of course, it has the municipal housing target that's been prescribed now. It has the planned and proposed municipal initiatives. That's what we want to spend quite a bit of time this afternoon on. It identifies who's going to own those initiatives in terms of responsibility and the stakeholders that will be involved in implementing those. The province is looking for context and description of how these initiatives can initiate the acceleration of housing development, the number of units that might be yielded by each of the initiatives, any considerations that should be taken into account for barriers to how we might actually accomplish these goals. And then, of course, mitigation strategies, how might we address those barriers? And of course, reporting and monitoring measures. So the province has provided a number of sample housing pledge strategies. So these are potential initiatives that could be written into the pledge for how do we get to that 5,500 homes by 2031. And the strategies are just basically, to ways that we can encourage and promote gentle intensification, ways that we can tap into provincial funding programs. The two that were identified by the province is the Streamlined Development Approval Fund, which unfortunately Woodstock is not large enough to be eligible for. It was only made available to the largest 36 or 39 municipalities in the province. Information on development approval timelines, how fast can we turn around a planning application? How fast can we turn around a building permit? There are prescribed in regulation timelines for how many days we actually have to process these things once they are deemed complete. But the province would like to know, are we having difficulties? Is there ways that we can streamline the development approval process to make housing permits available faster? Strategies to use municipal surplus lands. And the council is evidence of doing just this on a number of occasions with the recent sale of the Graham Street former hydro building and the work that is currently underway under the direction of council to rezone the Juliana, the former golf, the Downs, Cedar Creek Downs Golf Club property for high density residential. So we're currently doing that, and council has been very clear that any underutilized city assets they want to see put to the best use, and that most often will not include our ownership. So commitments to fund and approve the critical municipal infrastructure. Now, water, wastewater is not within the purview of the City of Woodstock Council. It's the purview of the County of Oxford. But transit would be an example of something that is within council's domain, and whether or not any transit improvements would be recommended as a result of increased density within municipal neighborhoods. So things like that. So priorities for strategic and specific planning decisions to expedite planning in priority areas. Do you create higher density permissions in higher traffic corridors or around our transit terminal, as an example? Updating zoning bylaws to permit a greater range of housing, and we're going to be talking a bit about that some more in the initiatives. There are also some other tools within the Planning Act, such as the community planning permit system. It's something that's been around for a while. We've dabbled in some areas of this, not quite the community planning permit system. We think we're fairly streamlined process now, but it's certainly something that we can look at again. So these are just suggestions for what strategies would be included in a housing pledge. So the province has shared with us a number of council endorsed pledges. These are all hot links, so council will have the electronic file and you will be able to access those pledges directly by clicking on these links. These are all the first tranche of municipalities. So this was the larger 100,000 plus municipalities that submitted their housing pledges in the spring of 2023. We've highlighted 4 here: City of Guelph, City of Hamilton, Town of Milton, and Town of Oakville as favorites of staff preferences for patterning the development of a City of Woodstock housing pledge. So we invite council to take a look at those and share your thoughts. And with that, we'll move on.
Okay, I guess that's over to me now. There's going to be a few more staff presentations as we go through the afternoon today, but we're moving more into the interactive portion of the meeting. So again, as Mr. Curry mentioned, there's not being decisions made today. This is just for information gathering purposes. Staff is looking to understand sort of the interests and input of council as we bring back options for council to consider in the housing pledge. So as we look at this, one of the things that we wanted to do and understand is sort of what council's vision is for what 2031 and beyond might look like following implementation of the strategies identified in our housing pledge. So what are some of the things that we hope to see in our community? So we've identified a few that we thought potentially might be on your mind. What we'd like to hear is, do you agree with these? Do you not agree with these? What's missing? And so I'll turn it over once I have a chance to highlight some of these. So what's the process for this meeting for these types of activities as we get into these this afternoon as well, is that we will stop sharing the screen, allow council to have the conversation. Staff is going to be capturing these in here. We'll bring them back up on the screen to review what sort of reflect the discussion, and then we'll move on to the next activity. So some of the possible things that we identified in our discussions preparing for today's meeting that could potentially form a vision are that, everyone has a place to call home, that rental rates are affordable for those with moderate income, that we have a healthy 3% vacancy rate, and that comes from the information that staff will provide in the next couple of slides as well. What might our transit service look like at that stage? Are we aspiring to exceed our housing target or not? So these were just ideas that staff had for consideration to prompt your thinking around what we're looking for. We're not looking to align or agree upon a vision. We're really just kind of looking to gather information from council. And so with that, I'll stop sharing, and I guess if I'll continue to facilitate this conversation, look for input from council. Is there any other thoughts? Do those points that we identified potentially as vision resonate? Is there any that councils have concern with it?
So just for clarification, so obviously the center is housing, and then the vision is what does 2031 Woodstock look like? So I would add, I don't know what kind of wording you would want, but I would add, doubling childcare spaces or more childcare and more childcare locations.
Thanks. So we'll capture those. And again, we'll bring those back up on the screen before we move on to the next activity. Anyone else?
I think we have to have a conversation around infrastructure and what is needed in order to support the growth vision for 2031. I'm not exactly sure how to wordsmith that, but I think infrastructure certainly needs to be on a part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you. We'll capture that.
That was what I was going to say too, that the infrastructure is really important, because there's policing, when we all know that with policing now and with the additional amount of people coming into our city, it's really important. It's very important for our streets too, the parking. Of course, I always go to parking, and the width of our streets, and there's a lot to consider. New fire hall, and so we have to think of what we'll have to spend to be able to hit our target, I think.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I think that's an important note, is when we're talking about infrastructure, not to just use that broad term, but rather identify specifically what are some of those pieces. So you've identified fire service, police service, width and capacity of roads, parking. Did I miss any of those specifically that we want to capture? I'm sure we can add others as well. And again, that's sort of for the foundation of the conversation. I don't think when we look at some of those pledges that have been submitted already to the province, they're not looking for that level of detail. That's a conversation that we need to have, but something at a higher level that we're going to include in the pledge would be to make sure that we've considered the appropriate infrastructure to support the housing and the population growth that comes along with those. So we'll make sure we capture those. Robin, you've got those? Perfect.
I'm kind of piggybacking off of what Councillor Leatherborough mentioned with childcare, but I also think healthcare is a big concern as well too. We already have a major shortage of doctors, so kind of looking at that lens, maybe a bit of I wouldn't say it needs to go with childcare, but a similarity that we already have a low number of childcare and a low number of doctors and such. So,
okay, thank you, Councillor Leatherborough.
I'd also add nurse practitioners potentially being an option, as well as doctors. When I think of density, I'd like to see in 2030 more density, specifically in the downtown. I'd like to see, instead of a healthy 3% vacancy rate, I'd like to see 0 vacant buildings in the downtown. Like if there was some type of formula to identify land ownership, building ownership, how long it's been vacant. That's a priority of mine in this term, but I'm saying we do have a lot of weathering buildings that I think people need to be held accountable, as well as could those be outfitted for some type of units and things like that. And I'm also going to throw this out there because it's only brainstorming, but some type of bridge or additional access to the north side of Woodstock. And I'm sure we would all like to see that be a more affordable option as well.
Just let me check in with, so you're good in capturing those. That's okay. I just want to make sure because we've got other staff who can jump in and capture those as well, because you don't miss any thoughts. And of course, this is being recorded, so we can always go back and capture those as well. I think Councillor Lauder.
I think the environment is very important, and the loss of trees, and we're talking about so much density. And for instance, I can name one area that's proposed and it's coming up as off of 59 Highway off of Lakeview, and the amount of trees, if the density is what we're hearing, we have not received that information. It's only things that we're getting from people in the area, but just the loss of a lot of trees in any areas, and we end up with pavement or cement. So I think that's something that we really have to think about in trying to have more density. So,
Thank you. Councillor Martin, did I see your hand up earlier or no?
I don't know if it was, but I have something to say. I appreciate that transit service is on here. I think it's a really important piece of the overall big picture. I actually had an impromptu curbside discussion with Director DeHaan just the other day. And we know that in other communities, so I think of Waterloo Region, and I know we are not Waterloo Region, I know that it's a much bigger, but the LRT, the light rail transit ION system, when you look back to before it was constructed to now, all along that track system, intensification and density has naturally occurred as a result. And so I think that I would like to see us be proactive in our transit strategy. As a population, nearing 50,000 people, we are probably at the point where our transit system needs to be rejigged. And do we rejig it now in a way planning for future growth and intensification? If you build it, they will come. So if we put that service into place, will intensification happen more naturally in certain areas because the transit is there? So I would rather chicken and egg, I would rather see us be proactive on the transit piece and put together a plan that supports the future growth of residential growth along those lines. And I'm not an expert in transit by any means. So I'll leave that to the experts, but I really think it's an important piece of this discussion when we talk about traffic on our roads and parking, that if we put the transit infrastructure in place, we will be solving problems before they're created.
Thanks. Marichioni?
Thank you. I'd actually like to echo Councillor Martin's. I think it's really important that we do look at transit. Parking, I think everybody in this room can agree on streets and just the pure volume of traffic we have been seeing the last few years, being proactive for transit and encouraging people, making it easier, however that looks, for more people to take the transit around will help with that. So just for what it's worth.
Thanks.
And parking density, I think, is just to make sure we have that highlighted, that places, so it's other municipal lots or whatever it needs to be to encourage people coming to downtown and other places to shop to make it easier is important.
Thanks. Councillor Schadenberg?
Yeah, actually I have three to add to the list. One would be education. We have a subdivision right now coming up on Carn Road that they're moving a lot of dirt around to get ready for servicing, which means houses will be soon thereafter. But where do those kids go to school? Springbank School is pretty capacity wise full. And I know Thames Valley does have a chunk of land where they could build a school, but nothing's been earmarked or guaranteed for us at this point. And of course, the north side of Piddock is yet to be built. Besides the fact that they are going to be building a school there, they certainly haven't started building. The other two I've got on my list, one would be recreational facilities. Obviously, the city of Woodstock has 3 arenas currently, and We want to sort of hopefully eliminate one of those arenas and build a third one to replace an aging facility. But do we need 4 arenas and other recreational facilities come into mind right away? Doesn't matter if it's something simple and outdoors like a pickleball court or something more expensive and outdoors or indoors. And the last item I wanted to mention was library. Is our library going to have the capacity for square footage to be able to maintain a 50,000 plus population? Because quite frankly, I think we're already almost at 50,000 population as it stands now.
Thank you. Joni?
Yeah, can we also add maybe tourism to that? You know, I'm thinking of places like Stratford and places that we like to go, you know, on the odd weekend or a Sunday afternoon, if we go for a drive, what we can do and make it that look like that maybe, you know, people are coming here for that to help our local restaurants and shops.
Councillor Wismer Van Meer?
Councillor Schattenberg actually highlighted one of the ones I had on my list, which was education, but kind of maybe as part of that is the fact of transit for the schools, because there's such a shortage of buses for the schools that even if they build the schools, that doesn't take care of a lot of the problems on the road. Algonquin Public Schools is a prime example of how incredibly awful that is right now. So I think that having that transit part of the school transit with the education piece is important.
If I can add on to that, Councillor Wismer Van Meer, one thing I've been kind of talking with school boards and everything else, I'd love to see, I think it's, and pardon me if that's not exact, but I think it's a 1.6 kilometer range around a school. I'd love to see that shortened to, again, so we don't have the parking issues in front of schools, that maybe more kids can be picked up on transit. So if that is council wishes, to go along with helping all the drop-offs and pickups, traffic, we might be able to put something together and put a letter out to the school boards officially, seeing if that would ever be a possibility.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Councillor Otter?
One thing that the need in the north end is a commercial area. If we can't have a bridge, that would be nice to have a commercial area that we don't have to always go into the other end of town to go to the grocery store or the liquor store. As I keep asking for a farm boy, but you don't seem to be doing anything there. But I do think that we need a commercial area in north of the bridge.
Maybe final look around. We are okay. Yep.
So I think for me, my vision for Woodstock is a much more intensified downtown. And that I haven't seen all the slides, so I don't know how much detail we're going to get into and how to accomplish that. I imagine that we are. And I'm not sure if this is the time to mention it, but I'd like to see us potentially develop an intensification rate. And that is a measure of how many, what is our standard for how many units must be developed within our current boundary as opposed to outside of a current boundary. And so, yeah, intensification rates. And I definitely think downtown intensification, increased heights, more transit, they all kind of go together.
Yeah, I think that intensification rate is an example of the types of tools and initiatives that we might consider during that portion of the agenda. So maybe we can star that sticky and make sure that we copy that down to that area of the agenda. So I'm going to share my screen and pull the mural back up to capture what we just talked about. I am trying to keep the meeting on track so we don't spend too long here, but I do want to make sure that we have, you know, a chance to have this important conversation and to hear from council everything that they wanted to share. So I think this has been helpful to hear from council that we're not just looking at, of course, the housing infrastructure and the direct, you know, intensification strategies, but rather that we make sure that we're considering all these other factors that impact people's quality of life in a community. So things like the supporting infrastructure, hard infrastructure, but also those soft services and the services that are vital to people living and being part of a community. So thank you for indulging us on that. And if we will certainly share this afterwards in terms of the meetings. Council will see all of this and we'll bring it back, and all of this will be reflected at a much more distilled version into the pledge that comes back for council's consideration. I would have to maybe check with the clerk in terms of whether all of the screen captures will be part of the public. Yeah, or like minutes. A version of, yeah, so we'll have those as well so that people can share those. So our next activity is to focus on the goals of the housing pledge. So similar to, you know, that vision that we created, so that's more that aspirational. So some of the things that we want to make sure that we take into consideration as we go. And again, we're not going to be identifying a specific goal that we're going to identify. It's more, again, to help staff understand what we're looking for as part of the pledge. So some examples, again, that we came up with for council's consideration and review. And so certainly if there's any of these that don't resonate or that you disagree strongly with, please share those in your comments. So things like, obviously, it's a housing pledge. We want to increase the housing options for Woodstock residents. Council has had a lot of discussions around making housing more affordable, recognizing that that's a pressing need for people these days. Presumably, as we increase density, we would like to minimize conflict with existing residents. We want to protect residents' quality of life, and I think that came out through the last exercise with identifying all those supporting infrastructure pieces that need to be considered. Potentially, we want to maximize our share of the Building Faster Fund. And of course, as we've heard in that last exercise, increasing density. So I would now turn it back to council and the floor to, again, provide feedback on those, identify other goals that they would like to get out of this housing pledge. Mayor Shannon?
Thank you. I guess a goal would definitely to try to make it a little easier to understand what's allowed, what's not allowed. You know, speaking of ARUs in particular, since this is a fairly fresh one, we're just getting to know. I know personally, I get a lot of messages and questions on, you know, how do I put an apartment in and where can it go? And, you know, I don't have all the information, but I think the goal should be to make it at least easier for people to get that information. So whatever that looks like. Again, keeping it high overview, but making it simple as possible.
Councilor Leatherborough?
So just so I'm clear, would that be simplifying the process is what you're saying?
Not only simplifying the process, but also can I do it? Just general information was the start. I mean, there's definitely other areas I think we're going to go into a bit more detail on that, but just as a general goal, make it easier just for general public to look up information saying, okay, I might want to do this. What do I need? So, you know, just bullet points of, okay, you know, I've got 5 out of 6, enough to maybe invite somebody from the city to come take a look and okay, yeah, we can check all 6 check marks and okay, let's go ahead. Or vice versa. I've only got 2 out of, again, I'm making up 6. I don't know how many points there'll be, but if I've only got, you know, 1 or 2 of them, you know, it's out of the question. It's not going to be possible. So to save staff a lot of time from maybe having to go out and answer those questions, if we make it simple for the general public to understand the general rules at this point.
Sorry, continue.
Just to follow up with that then off of that tab, I guess, I would hope to see how we could collectively support the engineering and building department to make these, like, obviously make housing more affordable. Absolutely. And how do we, as a city of Woodstock, staff, building permits, you know, building inspectors, all of those types of things, especially when we are seeing a shortage, it's how can we provide support, I guess, in that specific department to allow for the red tape and the process to flow smoothly as well as quickly as possible.
I'm not sure who had their hand up first, but Councilor Potter, go ahead.
So I'm thinking of, say, for instance, like we're intensity. So, so we have in our one zone, say for instance, it's 30-foot frontage, and because we want more density in there, and then somebody comes in and changes it, we've already shrunk it to this. So then somebody comes in, oh, I would like minor adjustment for to take it down to 28 feet frontage or the setbacks. I think that we have to set our limits and not keep shrinking so that we're in here packed in that it's going to change the whole atmosphere and sight of our city. I think we have to keep a perspective on what our city is going to look like.
So
So
clarify
if we-
kind of boundaries that, or where you kind of draw that line.
Yeah, that draw a line and not come back, not having the planners or whoever come back and saying, okay, we agree with a 28-foot frontage on this one. I think that there is a limit and we should be able to stick to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin?
Thank you, through the chair. There were 6 bullet points that were put up here as original goals, and the 5th one is maximize our share of the Building Faster Fund. Can someone explain to me or explain to us what that meant?
Yeah, so I think, I'll take a stab, you can correct me if I, so I think according to the formula that the province laid out, if you meet a minimum 80% of your target, you get a portion of the fund, and then up to, if you exceed your housing target, you get additional funds. So I'm not sure if there's a hard cap on what that top end is. However, you know, there is an ability to exceed your housing target and then receive more than the amount.
I just wasn't sure if it meant leveraging the fund against something else, or if it's the achieving 100%, 120%. That's more what it was referring to. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Leatherborough?
I'll probably say it every single time, so bear with me, but protect residents' quality of life. So again, childcare. I really want to see, what do we want to achieve? I would like to see, again, our phenomenal economic development group working with potentially county staff, because we always have to keep in mind that there is this 2-tier government structure. But people can't pay for their expensive homes and day-to-day things without childcare. And I feel that, I think there's 2,600 unique children across Oxford waiting on the list right now, and that's ages 0 to 4. So without getting into that conversation, I just really want to continue to reiterate that that has to be a factor into making life more affordable, which, whether it's housing, whether it's, you know, quality of life, whether it's environment and how the future of our city looks, children have to be able to have that care and allow, you know, their caregivers or parents to work to sustain a job and all of those things. So protect residents' quality of life. Yeah, again, support and work with various departments from the city to the county to identify where we can create more spaces, even if it's satellite. I mean, I'll keep this short, but we don't have to look at a 60 space childcare facility with all the bells and whistles. We can get innovative. We can have them in different parts of the community if we have to hit this housing target.
Councillor Wisdom Van Meer?
And I think that this one is not necessarily an R level, but what do we define affordable as? Because that's, you know, what's affordable to one is not affordable to the next. And as much as it'd be great to have more affordability in housing, what does that look like? So I think, I know provincially wise, that's something that they get pressure on, is defining what affordability or affordable housing looks like and what it is. But I think even on a municipal level, we can categorize what levels look like for affordable housing and how we can kind of achieve different pockets of affordability, keeping our community as a whole in mind.
Thanks. And I think that's actually, we're going to get some information from our Oxford County housing folks shortly. So they'll have a little bit of clarification around that affordability piece. Not to say that that doesn't necessarily need to be something that council chooses to include in this. Councillor Martin and then Councillor Shedd.
Thank you, through the chair. My goal is a lofty one, and it's the reason why I ran for this seat of city county councillor. I would love to see, as a part of this housing pledge, for the city to be able to work collaboratively, constructively, and cohesively with the county, because so many of the tasks ahead of us will require us to work cooperatively on infrastructure, on planning. And so that, while a lofty goal, is one I think that is critical to the success of our housing goals.
Councillor Scheibenberg?
Yeah, Councillor Lauder had mentioned frontage on property or setbacks on properties. I'm thinking that we have to have a close definition on the height of properties. where you're gonna allow 10 stories, where you might allow 12 stories, which is currently allowed in Woodstock, but in what neighborhoods and in what areas specifically are you gonna allow certain heights of buildings to be built? And then, of course, parking is automatically affiliated along with that, not only underground parking, but visitors parking spots.
So I think again, those perhaps are getting into some of the tools and tactics that we want to do. So maybe we'll capture that, Dickie, as well for including in the discussion later on. Councilor Wisdom, did you have your hand? Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, I will bring that back up and we can see what we have added here. Oh, sir. Yep. Go ahead.
Just because you said the campaigning, I'm thinking about what we want to achieve as well is that if we have to create more units and all of those things, and if we're working collaboratively, we really want to make sure that in 2030, 2031, Woodstock is a whole community. Often you'll hear, we don't want to turn into a bedroom community. So I'm not sure I never know how you put this all together on a sticky note, but really just unifying that we are in sync and trying to make sure that, yeah, continue to be a community, but not a bedroom community. And yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
If I can add to that, maybe just to continue being the friendly city, the friendly community, be independent of our own. Again, part of that tourism piece, maybe to have people wanting to come here.
Thank you for that. Again, I think some good discussion there to help staff understand sort of, what council's feeling as we go into the development of, some of these initiatives as we go through. So we are not too far off time, which is good. And maybe I'll ask Mr. Huff now to share some information about our current situation and some of the things that we're doing.
Certainly, thank you. Worship, just through you to council and the gallery. Yeah, I guess a good place to start when you're talking about land use planning is where are we at now? If we're talking about doing things that would be differently, how are we going to approach some of the issues we were talking about today? I think it's a good idea to understand where we're at now in terms of from an official plan policy perspective. And I can say that our official, like I guess you heard Mr. Puri in his initial comments and remarks that about county planning and city planning. And I think it's to be clear that we have a single planning document for the entirety of the county. That includes the city of Woodstock. We have a single planning department that provides service to the entire county, including the city of Woodstock. And this is the way that planning has been undertaken in this county since the county was established in the mid 1970s. And my experience of being here for some 20 odd years is that it's worked very well. We work very collaboratively. We make efforts to do so. And because the way the documents are set up, the official plan policies, the zoning, I think you need to have those good relationships in order to make those things work. And I think that that's part of why we're here today. You see myself and Rebecca here from the county on the housing side of things. Those collaborative efforts have really paid off for us in the years go by. We'd like to think that the work that we do here now, listening to your council will also help us there. The policies that we have in place in the official plan today have been, our plan was adopted in 1995. They very much have always supported the sorts of the higher density opportunities that we're talking about, the province is talking about today. Things like converted dwellings in low density residential areas for 2, 3, 4 unit dwellings have always been policies that have been historically in our plan. Policies that encouraged intensification in not just residential but mixed use areas has been something that our policies support. Policies for medium and higher density development and for those areas to be identified and developed. Identifying those areas has always been something that's been included in the policies, and certainly that we would look forward to the amendments we're talking about here, or that we may be talking about in order to encourage some of these things, would be building on that kind of solid infrastructure that we have now in our official plan policies. And I, just one of some of the comments just to touch on, Councillor Leatherbarrow had talked about something, our policy they don't define it or identify it, but certainly it's a provincial goal to create more complete communities. To do the kind of things that you're talking about, to make them so people can live and work in an area without having to be reliant on vehicles, reliant even on transit to a great extent. So that's something else that again, our policies have always not necessarily specifically identified, but certainly supported. But beyond that, you see on the slide up here on the screen that, other things that have been done more recently and that are in place now in the city of Woodstock. So the first one being a good example where, in the 2023, this council has facilitated the development of up to 3,500 new, and that means like draft approvals and registrations to some extent, but certainly those numbers are pretty substantive. And Mr. Curry mentioned the selling of some city assets to support housing is another area. A CIP is a community improvement plan. And inside of that, basically it's a document that allows the municipality to undertake or implement various incentives that may support things like intensification in the downtown. And those are what your current plan does now. There are opportunities to establish that or to expand that beyond the downtown, should council so see fit. And of course, there's a couple of things. There are waivers of just development charges in certain areas and select areas. And you can use that again to target areas that you may want to develop or to just facilitate in general different types of housing development. So, Colleen, thank you. So this is an overview, a very high-level overview of building permit activity in the city of Woodstock over the last decade. You see the numbers fluctuate, but certainly those, we have a very good mix of the types of developments that have happened. The city of Woodstock, probably more so than the rest of the communities in Oxford, has certainly facilitated a considerable amount of higher density development. And you see when you get down to the averages at the bottom, the 3-year average at 429 units a year is a pretty substantial amount for a 3-year period. But even the 5 and 10-year averages are I think they're pretty consistent in what we've seen. And with respect to so we talk about land supply in the city of Woodstock. I think this is, of course, these are units and not land supply, but when you equate the units to what the land supply is, you see that these are the kind of the breakdown of the units that are approved, are estimated to be approved, and what may be developed on existing undeveloped lands. And in the city of Woodstock, we don't have a lot of, beyond the approvals that have taken place over the last number of years, there's not a lot of vacant land left for new development. And the numbers you see here actually reflect a land supply of about 11 years. And the province actually looks for the municipalities to maintain a minimum of 15 years supply of land that is basically designated and prepared for development. And at the 3-year average, you saw the numbers previously, that 430 units, give or take, equates to about a 13-year supply. So as your numbers get higher, and as we get into some of the other slides here, you'll see that with if we're going to be meeting those housing targets, with a pledge, if that's the route the council goes, that basically the supply of land is going to be affected even more so. So if I could move on to the next. So so this is the housing targets that have been identified for the city of Woodstock. This has been discussed previously. 2023 target 403 units. Then you get into the essentially what these mean is based on the building permit activity that we've seen is that once we start getting into, in order to achieve the 5,500 target over that 10-year period, that we're going to have to exceed that 550. So 403 this year, targeted for 458. As we move further along, those numbers will need to get higher. And maybe what's important here is that when previous slides talking about the number of units, those are more of the traditional type units, those apartments and townhouses and single detached dwellings. As we can move forward, looking at ways to meet those annual targets, we may well want to look at things like what those numbers don't take into consideration are things like additional residential units, potentially redeveloping existing existing approvals that I've mentioned previously into higher density units that might assist in that respect.
I think we'll turn it over to Ms. Smith now.
Thank you. Through to council, maybe just to give a little bit of background on more the affordability definitions and just general affordability across the city with what we've been seeing. So to get into maybe the definition of affordable housing and just to maybe give a little bit of background of where affordable housing falls on the housing scale, because the housing scale we call the continuum. So affordable housing technically is classified as that housing that is just before market housing. So we're looking at generally targeting kind of the 50th and the 60th income decile. So those with low and moderate income households. So in general, what we call affordable housing, just to give a little bit of a scale, you're looking at a one-bedroom unit being rented between about 930 to about 1,161 per month. So again, targeting those moderate income households with kind of a 50 to about $65,000 a year. So when we refer to affordable housing, it's more targeting those moderate income households because we are seeing such a shift in those thresholds as we go forward. Now, it is affordable housing. We still have rent geared to income housing, but that's more on the left side of the continuum, more targeting those low income households. And then just to give a little bit of an idea of those affordability thresholds in terms of our income deciles. So this is really those income categories throughout Oxford. And really when you're getting into the high income, the 9th income decile, you're really looking at households that are making closer to about $200,000 a year. And when you compare that to what their carrying costs would be for a home, you're looking at them being able to afford likely a home around $650,000. Now, if you compare that to the average home price as of the end of August of this year, which was actually closer to $700,000, you can really see that affordability gap in terms of people being able to afford a home, even those in the highest income decile still are struggling to purchase a home. And again, oh, sorry, Colleen. And just looking at the renter side of things as well. So looking kind of in that moderate income, so the green there, those even kind of with that $55,000 income per year, they're really just looking at something around the $1,400 per month range. So we can go to the next one. So then comparing the actual rents that we're seeing across the county, so the one that's probably specific to Woodstock here, and this is likely now on the lower end for a one bedroom at about $1,500 a month. So we do see that go up to even $2,000 a month. And again, just showing kind of the gap in affordability there. And then getting a little bit into the rental vacancy rates. So we are seeing vacancy rates below 3% in all of our urban areas. Specific to Woodstock, we're seeing kind of same as Ingersoll in terms of the 1.4%. So that is basically signifies a very we don't have enough rental units. The supply is not there, so it's not a very strong rental market. There's not enough of a gap between renters and the home ownership for people to move into that category. So really just signifying that we don't have a very strong rental market. And again, for kind of focusing on the affordability gap, I won't go too far into this, but essentially everything that is in red is classified as unaffordable. So essentially we list out all of the housing types on the left-hand side and what their average prices would be. So looking at the condos all the way to kind of our townhouses at the bottom and what those average prices would be in comparison to our income deciles across the top. So really just showing that the one block in green there is showing that somebody in the highest income decile is really only able to afford a condo apartment. Now, again, this is not taking into consideration assets or a double income. This is really just looking at somebody who's looking to enter the market with no previous asset. And then on the rental side of things, it gets a little bit better with a bit more green, more affordability on that side. But again, really that affordability is focused to those above that moderate income threshold. And just the last slide here, again, to show the core housing need. So core housing need is when individuals don't have suitable or affordable housing. And really these are quite high thresholds. So the renter category is really above that 30%. Or in Tillsonburg specifically, but again, getting quite close to 30% in Woodstock as well. So again, that's 30% of the population that does not have adequate living accommodations in terms of it needing repairs and being able to afford the carrying costs. And then just some existing initiatives in terms of kind of encouraging those affordable housing builds throughout the city. So we do have a number of initiatives. A lot of capital funding is put towards these projects. And as well, again, into the community improvement plans that Gord had touched on before, some programs under that, development charge exemptions for those affordable units, a reduced tax rate, and again, some of those higher level government financing mechanisms and funding as well. Thank you.
Thanks to staff for the information. I guess maybe before we get into feedback specifically on that, is there anything that was in the staff presentation that council would like clarification on, or would like to ask questions of staff at this time on that information? And perhaps just for the gallery and those watching, the PowerPoint with those slides is available on the agendas, meetings and minutes page of the city's website. And so you can access all that information and have a closer look at some of those tables, which were maybe a bit harder to read on the screen here. So now we'll move into an open discussion again from council about the current situation. And essentially, we're just looking to gather, again, some perspective and feedback from council members, again, on potentially what's working well, and staff some thought together around some of those things that might be on our minds. But if you agree, disagree, have other ideas, feel free to share. So we'll start looking at both of these, and then I'll stop sharing and we can have that discussion again. So in terms of what's working well, you know, what we heard a few examples of what staff's perspectives were, but you know, what programs and initiatives are already in place that are helping us achieve our housing goals. So one that staff has identified is the fact that we are disposing of our surplus municipal lands, so we're not hanging on to those. We're making them available for residential development. In terms of areas of concern, we're looking to understand from council their perspectives around, you know, maybe some of the things that are in place that are preventing us. And again, Councillor Leatherborough had mentioned about maybe some staffing resourcing issues, potentially. That was on our list as well. You know, the timing, these things do take time. And so while, you know, we can approve them, it may still be some time before they're actually in place. We've already heard the discussion tonight or this afternoon around parking. NIMBYism, which is, you know, again, looking for specific developments, but not necessarily in particular areas. External constraints, perhaps, while, you know, developers who may be not choosing to build, even though they've got everything in place to do so for a variety of different reasons. And of course, all of this does cost money. So, so with that, if there's no other questions here, I will turn it over to council for input on that. Mayor Accioni?
Yeah, thank you. Under working well now, if we could add CIP programs, saying that, certainly I think we should look at the expansion of that program to either a bigger area or different areas throughout the city. Always thought that it's something we should look at for housing, specifically affordable housing. So not just a downtown plan, but maybe throughout different areas of the city. That can be included, or consideration from council to discuss?
Either we can start with one or move on to the other, but if you've got either, it's okay to have the open discussion. Councillor Ladder?
Not so sure if this is where I should be bringing this up, but the RGIs that we have so I'm on the Woodstock Nonprofit Housing Board. And so we have Kent and Canterbury, these are for seniors, and the one at Nellis Street. And the county has been really good in providing us with the land and helping and getting that project going. And so they've now asked us to do one on Southwood, which has started now. But the one question I guess I have is, as we pay off our mortgages, which we did pay off our mortgage on Kent Street, and so therefore we're not getting the subsidy we were getting for the RGI, so it's costing us the board more to have these RGI units, and so we can't afford to keep on doing that. I know they're supposed to look at this, but it's been a year now since we paid off our mortgage, and the other one will be paid off in 2026. And this is happening throughout not just Oxford County, all over. And we no one can seem to be getting the answer on this. And it is a concern because the RGIs that people need this support and we can't keep subsidizing. So as they become available for rent, do we go to the market value? So it is a concern with RGIs. So,
And so RGI being rent geared to
Yeah.
income.
yes,
Thank-
yeah.
Just for everyone's clarification, to make sure that we're
Yeah,
not
I'm
making
sorry,
assumptions
yes.
around
Yeah, I'm
acronyms.
sorry. Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah, okay.
All right, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councillor Lauder's comments, under things that are currently working really well is the relationship with the nonprofit housing and the work that's being done at the county on affordable housing. And while it isn't still enough, and there are still names on the list, major strides are being taken. And so the cooperation between those organizations, I think, is an incredibly positive thing that we need to acknowledge and recognize here, albeit you have identified a challenge within it. I think it's important to recognize. Under areas of concern, if I may, for me, one of the biggest obstacles right now is interest rates, for which we have zero control over. Rebecca Smith outlined numbers for us on what actual rents are in our community. And I enjoy my trusty mortgage calculator. And for myself, looked at a $400,000 mortgage at our current rate right now, a 3-year rate is 6.9%. That means a mortgage payment of about $2,700 a month. What you need to earn in order to pay a $2,700 a month does not make that affordable. If the interest rate was 3%, that mortgage payment goes down to $1,700 a month. And that is an enormous gap simply based on nothing else but interest rates. I anticipate that interest rates will come down, which should facilitate getting shovels in the ground and more houses built. But until that rate comes down, it is the biggest barrier for builders and for homeowners trying to get into the market.
And I think too, that's the type of, sort of consideration that I think we've seen in some of the housing pledges, the recognition that we can't get more homes if people aren't building them because people aren't buying them because they can't afford the interest rates. So while we may have no control over that, it's certainly something that's worth potentially identifying and including that in Mayor Accioni and then Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Again, to echo that, rates are definitely a big issue, speaking to a lot of developers and everything else. This is their hesitancies. But also, I think if we should have an area of concern is having developers, and I know there's some sitting here today, having some kind of control on when that is being built, right? Instead of having a piece of land sit for years and years. I think like we do with our industrial land sales, there should be a timeline. We should consider a timeline that is reasonable to have a developer have a piece of land to build that apartment building or even house, whatever that is. So we don't have so many places sitting in a land shortage or a house shortage, sorry, like we have right now.
So just for clarification, you're thinking perhaps, and this would fall under the tools, a timeline by which the land that has
Is
been
developed.
purchased has to be developed.
Correct. Yeah,
I think
thank
again,
you.
that might be something we can add into the tools section.
Yep.
Councillor Wisner Van Meer.
This might be a question for Ms. Smith, when it comes to like the affordable housing aspect of it in areas of concern. Does that include transitional housing? Just knowing that there is quite a lack of transitional housing available, and especially for folks who are kind of getting themselves back on their feet to have that ability of having transitional housing from whatever their experience or situation might be. Would you encompass that under affordable, or is that going to be a separate lens?
Through to the question. So that is a separate lens. I should have probably brought the housing continuum just to kind of lay out the different stages, but affordable housing is more about getting the more rental units. And I should say affordable units typically are within a building that also has market rents. And then on the transitional supportive side, that's where we get into where they need both capital and operating dollars to kind of make that work. So they are a little bit more expensive, but it is certainly needed. So that's just a different housing type that we are focusing on as well.
So I would say for me, that would be an area of concern is the fact of transitional housing maybe not being addressed as frequently as it, there's clearly a need for it within many communities. So, yeah, I would add that in there.
So maybe just before we continue on to that, I can pull up the housing continuum. If you just wanted to reference that. That's the graphic that you were looking for?
Yeah, so that's just the graphic along the bottom there. So not saying that we don't do transitional housing because there certainly is the need. It's just sometimes a different funding pot, I will say. So it's really just the need across the housing continuum, but kind of the figures that I provided before is more that focus on the affordable rental just before the market rental as well. So certainly a need for that type of housing. It's just a little bit of a different category, a different funding model too.
And again, that is in the PowerPoint slides at the end under supplementary information. Councilor Leibert?
I have a few questions. So when we're thinking about the variety of units and creating units, when we see a home go up for sale, and then there could be potentially a new buyer, right? And just take away the cost of that home. But like those units, obviously that flipping of the units or new homeowners, that doesn't qualify. No. And so with that as well, I'm thinking of timing and affordability, and I'm wondering if a tool could be to increase the amount that for our vacant building registry bylaw. Like I almost feel like it's too light in terms of action and trying to keep people on top of taking care of their buildings. Because again, if we're pressed to create so much more units all over the city, but then downtown specifically, there's like 15 that are vacant, it just doesn't necessarily line up for me visually. So that would be one tool that I would suggest is increasing those fees for people that have, historically not looked after their building for like decades in the city of Woodstock. And on top of that, through to Ms. Smith, I'm just curious, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but in the option of like the Capitol Theater downtown Woodstock, I know that there was some legalities and it was the cities and now it's the counties. But even when we're looking at tools of whether we're not able to get developers to build fast enough because of interest rates and all of those things, but still thinking of a vibrant and healthy community for the city of Woodstock, how can we again clean up lots like that if there is a holdup of development? I'm not sure where that is in the queue, and maybe you can enlighten me. But those things also kind of filter around my brain when I'm thinking of, okay, we have to create more units, we have to make everything beautiful, vibrant. So I don't know if there's a question there, but that's kind of my train of thought.
Through to the question. So we actually are meeting with the city, I think in the next week or so, to discuss the advancement of that property. That one has taken a little bit longer than most, just because there were some other things we had to deal with. It needed some environmental work as well and some cleanup. So unfortunately, those things do take time and they are out of our control. So it is in the queue for sure. And just noting that sometimes things take time because we do have to pull funding together to make sure that projects will be viable when they go out. So unfortunately, while we'd like to get shovels in the ground right away, there's just sometimes those other things that are kind of in the background as well. So I guess in short, we are moving forward with that project and we should see something happening next year.
So I think maybe I'll just refocus us on the point of this discussion is the current situation and what's working well, what's not. So I think I heard maybe funding is something that is potentially preventing it. Not to say that these conversations and clarifications aren't good, but just to keep us on track from a timing standpoint. Just if we continue back to the current situation. I think we weren't straying far from just with the questions and clarifications.
Well, I'm just trying to think of
Yeah,
tools
totally.
though,
Yeah.
too, right? As
Yeah.
I'm saying, I get, let's stay on task, but I just feel like it's kind of conflicting that we have vacant buildings, vacant land,
For
no fault of anybody, but I'm just trying to figure out how can we hold people accountable and also clean up properties to wait for the developer to come. I don't know. I guess I just
Yeah.
thought of it as a tool as well.
No, and that's fine. And I think we've captured that under the tool section. We'll bring that forward. So perfect. Anything else in terms of things that are working well and not working well? And perhaps I'll bring up the mural again if that helps. See if everything's captured and if we are comfortable moving on, or if we want to add anything further here at this stage. Councilor Martin.
I don't want to overstate the obvious, but I think the reason we're here today is to talk about, for me, one of the biggest areas of concern is our density targets just aren't high enough. And if a developer wants to put a shovel in the ground, the only way it's financially viable right now is to increase the density, increase the number of units per acre. It's not the only reason, it's a key component to the formula. So without increased density, without increased heights, without, reduced lot lines, without reduced frontages, without parking considerations, we will not be ultimately successful in our pledge and in our goals without taking a look at density targets and intensification rates.
All right, and let's. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Hupp again.
Thank you. Again, so going forward, we talked a little bit about official plan policies and zoning and some of the tools that we have in place today, but this is to expand on that. These slides will help us to kind of focus a bit more on some of the things that we can do with those tools and other tools that we may, other resources we may have available to us to assist in considering the city's pledge. So this slide, when you talk about the official plan, I mean, you look at the interim revisions. So again, we have a good foundation in our policies. So some easy wins would be to look at those plans, look at ways. And again, in a general sense, I've heard a lot of discussion around the table this afternoon about things like looking at the downtown and increasing density in the downtown area. That's something that would be easy to do under your current policies without doing a lot of work. Looking at better utilizing maybe even existing commercial areas to facilitate more mixed use type development, provide more opportunities for people to be able to live where they work or where they shop without having to, get in a car or get on a bus. These are the sorts of things that under the current provisions of the zoning and policies we could probably look at. And even another thing when I talk about official plan policies and zoning, these things are always kind of intertwined together, right? Because they kind of go together, as Mr. Creary had mentioned earlier. The policies kind of lay out your plan going forward, but the zoning is really where you implement those things. And that's where this council particularly makes the decisions about how things get implemented through those policies. And so if you're going to utilize tools like the zoning bylaw, are there ways to I say kind of smooth the zoning out so that you allow more types of units within an existing zone or create a zone that allows those things, that so you're not having like your R1s, R2s, R3s. Is there a way to do that? Those are some things that we can look at through the use of the zoning tool for those things. And carrying on with the zoning, of course, just talked about some of these things here, but even if there's, you're looking at different forms of housing and built forms, densities, again, using the zoning bylaw while you may actually facilitate your density ranges or intensification, as has been maybe mentioned in those policies, you're always going to implement those through zoning, and that's important to make sure that your zoning facilitates that, so that if you have zoning targets in your policies, pardon me, you want to make sure that you have zoning that makes sure that those densities actually happen going forward. So other things that you might want to consider beyond that, certainly planning direct, we've talked about in our office and at county council, because we've, again, a lot of the things we're talking about here are something that we're actually initiating through county council direction to initiate countywide, looking at different ways of accommodating new density. Certainly, more opportunities for streamlining. That can include things like delegation of some of approvals to staff, depending on what those might be. We'd have to investigate those, but there are certainly opportunities that may be available. Also, something that's not on this slide, but looking at other ways of approaching zoning, kind of going back to the last discussion of zoning, that, other tools that might be available. Mr. Curry mentioned things like the development permitting system, other kinds of zoning that may more focus more on form of development as opposed to, the actual, dimensions like the setbacks and whatnot are things we can look at too that might assist in facilitating more streamlined approval processes. And then beyond planning, because we are actually looking at, just so council's aware, that we are looking at additional planning staff in our budgets to facilitate a lot of the things we're talking about here, not just in Woodstock, but countywide, but even looking at things internal to the city, like having somebody who is responsible for assisting people who are looking at intensification, things like additional residential units or other intensification projects that may come about. Having somebody dedicated that knows how that works. I think we talked really early on in the discussion today about demystifying some of the mysteries that go with development. And I think that might be something that we could consider there too. And again, leading into that is just providing that information for people. Having people who can explain it, but also having information that's kind of upfront and provide some of that guidance for people as they move through processes. I think a lot of these things would help in serving and in facilitating additional, not just intensity or intensification, but just development in general.
I think we're over to Mr. Hammond now.
Rio, thank you. So we've heard the term community improvement plan a couple of times already today through Mr. Huff, and Mayor Accioni's mentioned it as well. And I know council's aware of community improvement plans as we have one for the downtown already. So I guess my plan here is just to take a bit of a step back and remind ourselves why community improvement plans exist and the opportunities that it provides in terms of the city council or the city being able to influence the type of development we want to see. So under the Ontario Municipal Act, in general, municipalities are prohibited from providing direct financial incentives to any property owner. And it's often called bonusing. We refer to it as bonusing, that we can't waive taxes for a business because that would be bonusing and it would be on the wrong side of the Municipal Act. So in general, the province has put that in place to prevent municipalities from extending themselves beyond their means to the detriment of their citizens. However, in the province's wisdom, they have provided a tool to provide an exemption for the anti-bonusing legislation, and that's a tool called the CIP, or Community Improvement Plan, as we've heard. And the Community Improvement Plan is actually part of the Planning Act, and it allows municipalities to offer direct financial incentives to achieve specific community goals. And in the province's wisdom, the boundaries around establishing a CIP are actually very broad. I think they're intentionally broad to allow municipalities to develop programming which meets each municipality's specific needs. So for example, community improvement plans can be developed around environmental needs, social or community needs, and of course, economic development needs, as we see with our downtown community improvement plan. The community improvement plan, or CIP, is a planning document. So it's developed through public meeting, consultation with the ministry, and then follows the normal planning process to be adopted. So CIP itself establishes a set of goals that the council or the city would like to achieve, sets eligibility for being considered for financing through that program, and develops a range of incentives and programs that can be accessed, as well as setting funding limits. So it's not necessarily a blank check. And as I said, we've got one in our downtown. The current version's been in existence since 2011. It's been functioning pretty well as far as the downtown goes. There is programming within the downtown CIP to encourage housing in the downtown through grants and loans to create new residential units in the downtown. The logic behind that was the more people living in and around the downtown, the healthier our downtown's going to be. So that's the example I think that we're familiar with. And I think the best analogy for understanding or viewing a CIP is the idea of a toolbox. So the community improvement plan itself, the planning document, could be seen as the toolbox. And within that toolbox, council is able to establish a number of programs or put a number of tools into the toolbox that they can access to incentivize a particular type of development in a specific area, or even citywide for that matter. The types of tools that can go into the toolbox are things such as grants and loans as well as tax rebates. And when I say tax rebate, it's actually a grant back once a property owner's paid their taxes. And those programs are really intended to offset the costs of development in an area like the downtown, and incentivize those that are developing properties to meet the standards and do the types of things the city would like to achieve. The objective of the CIP is to use municipal incentives or municipal funding to help leverage investment within the community from both the public and nonprofit sectors. So for example, in our downtown, I think this or previous councils as well as this council in total have probably approved somewhere around 40 community improvement plan applications in the downtown. The city has granted or loaned over $1 million. And in return, we've probably leveraged 2 to 3 times that much, 20 to 30 times that amount of money. So the $1 million that we've loaned and granted has probably leveraged, $20 to $30 million in private sector money of investment into the downtown. So pretty good return on our investment. In terms of provincial grants and initiatives, in terms of affordable housing, the definition that Ms. Smith had mentioned, there aren't a whole lot of opportunities that exist. And the reason they don't exist is because through other forms of legislation, incentives have already been created. So for example, for affordable housing through Bill 23, affordable housing units are already development charge exempt in the downtown. So we don't have that tool in our toolbox per se. However, there are a few gaps that would still exist, I would suggest, when it comes to affordable housing. The one would be granting back of the municipal fees. So things like building permit fees and fees associated with planning applications. So that's the one thing we could look at adding to a citywide community improvement plan if council was interested in doing that. A more novel idea is some communities also have CIPs that include attainable housing. I was just speaking with Ms. Smith here before the meeting. Attainable housing, I think, is a little bit more of a loose definition. I'm not sure that there's an agreed upon definition of what attainable housing is, but some communities have adopted that, and under that program, municipalities have provided grants to developers to undertake feasibility studies to see whether attainable housing is something that they could still undertake and make money at, as well as the development of accessory residential units, or ARUs as we're calling them these days, and more traditional CIP type programs. And finally, the last comment I would have is also some communities are offering surplus land grant programs where the city looks at its surplus properties and offers them for sale for affordable housing, and is able to offer it for sale or agree to sell it at a lower than market rent in order to achieve CIP type initiatives or goals of the council. So as Mr. Creer has already mentioned, we're not flush with surplus municipal properties right now. When they do come along, we do our best to get them to market and try to put them to the highest and best use. So in the case of 16 Graham Street, we offered that through an RFP. We made it quite clear that in terms of judging which the best proposal was, it's going to be based on the number of residential units being created. That was a high priority for the council today. And then the former Cedar Creek Golf Course, we're making our way through rezoning that property as well. So that's all I have to say on CIPs at this point.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Hammond. So before maybe we dive into the actual open dialogue on the tools, which is, I know, what everyone's been eagerly anticipating and looking forward to, I would maybe see if there's any questions for staff based on that information that was just shared. Okay, so for this portion, we do have it broken down into categories. Perhaps just so we don't get dizzy following the slides moving around on the screen, we'll try to keep it in that order. Certainly, if members of council had something that came to them after the fact we've moved on, we can certainly go back and capture that. So, feel free to bring up anything that has come to you since the start of our discussion. Again, this is really just sort of a free flow of ideas so that we can get information. So what we'll do is for each of these sections, which are planning, tools, initiatives, and strategies, service levels, streamlining and simplifying processes, financial potentially infrastructure, and then other. So those are the categories that we've had. So we'll start with planning, and the two sections within that would be looking at official plan options and zoning. And so again, when we're looking at zoning, as Mr. Huff had said, this is sort of the details of how we implement the policies within the official plan. So things like built form, permitted uses, parking regulations would all fall under zoning. So I'll review the stickies on here. And then again, when we get into the discussion, I will turn off the screen sharing and we can pull that back up at the end of each section before moving on to the next one. Just looking at my notes. Again, so if council sees these, anything that resonates with them, anything that you feel we should focus on, if there's concerns about any of the ones that are identified here by staff. I should also note that the color coding, so yellow are things that are already in place potentially, green are things that are in progress, and purple are new opportunities that we could potentially explore through council's direction in the future. So I'll zoom in so we can actually see these. So some of the official plan opportunities that we could look at would be to identify interim official plan policy revisions that could be considered to facilitate more gentle density and other appropriate forms of intensification in advance of a new official plan. So I think looking at the planners for direction, undertaking a new official plan is not a quick process. It's quite a lengthy one. And so that will be happening after the new provincial policy statement comes out, which will not get us these tools in place in advance of meeting our housing targets. So we'd be looking at some interim steps or interim amendments that we'd want to look at. Reviewing the official plan to further streamline the development approval process. So as we looked at on the slides, delegated authority, removing of holding for staff, things like that in advance of the new OP. Ensuring the city and county have up-to-date growth forecasts and land need information so that it's easy and fast to update any additional growth that's needed to address updated planning or housing policy direction. And again, preparing to initiate the development of a new official plan in 2025 so that we can reflect any of the new changes coming out of the province when they release their new provincial policy statement, planning statement. And then reviewing and updating minimum density targets and removing unnecessary barriers to increase density where appropriate. And so I think maybe that reflects some of the conversation that council had already shared in some of the earlier slides. Any questions of this one? Do we want to talk about this or do we want to move into zoning too? Because they're kind of integrated. We could look at both of them and then. So looking at those ones, reviewing the city's zoning bylaw provisions to make sure that they effectively facilitate the appropriate forms of residential intensification, including a review of permitted use unit types. So that comes into, again, built form. So the height, the setback, lot coverage, things like that, as well as other provisions like parking requirements in terms of the number of spaces that are required, things like that. We heard already about simplifying zoning regulations, potentially combining zones or eliminating special zones to sort of facilitate development, increasing density regulations in targeted commercial zones, or, again, these are ideas for council's direction or consideration. So, if we wanted to have that everywhere, it could be something that council provides direction to. Investigating the feasibility of potential alternatives to traditional zoning, so more form-based codes or community planning permit systems for certain areas or classes of development. And again, I would have to turn it over to the planners to provide more context on what that means specifically. Considering expanding the boundaries described in Schedule D of the zoning bylaw. So that is an area around our downtown, but looking at how that impacts off-street parking within the downtown and regulations for developments there. And consider a reduction of the parking requirements for any apartment dwelling, house, street row, horizontally attached or multiple attached dwelling houses without private driveways from 1.5 parking spaces to a lower ratio to be determined. And further consideration, reduction in consideration for affordable housing units. So those are some of the ones that staff has put forward for council's consideration and to prompt thinking. This is where we're looking to you for, again, which ones are you most interested in? Which ones do you think would be most effective? Do you have any creative ideas of other things that we should look at? And the specifics of these can be potentially discussed at a future date. We're looking to understand if there's something that is of particular interest, we want to make sure that there is language in our housing pledge to reflect that that is work to be undertaken and how we will increase the housing density. So I will stop talking and put that back to you.
Thank you. I love what's here on the screen right now, and I realize not everybody can see this, but the bullet points are pretty well bang on. I guess I just wanted to share something I'm getting a lot more calls about. We're not just talking about parking, but also in existing neighborhoods. I can certainly say that the parking requirements have certainly gone up. So I don't know where this goes, but not just for new builds, but maybe we should look at what's allowable, again, as part of that, the frontage. I know we're not getting into specifics today, but I want to make it clear that, I mean, we do have an issue with people living in their homes, more people living in homes with the parking issues. I think we have to look at widths to allow more vehicle parking in front, whatever that may look like. And I know Councillor Lauder is never in favor of that one either, but I was at a house just before this, our meeting today, where, a prime example, they've been there 24 and a half years. And with their children getting older, they can't find a place to live. And now they're living there, and while they need their vehicle because they're going out of town to work. And so we're seeing those pressures more and more. So I think while we talk about parking, we should also look at existing neighborhoods at the same time, not just new builds. I guess we'll throw that out there.
Thank you. Councilor Martin?
A phrase that has kind of been rattling around in my head since this meeting was scheduled was eminent domain. And that is the act of taking old, derelict, rundown properties, buildings, acquiring them through a municipal process and then putting them out there for redevelopment. I'm not sure if that's a piece of zoning or official plan, or if that falls under that jurisdiction whatsoever, or is it even a tool for us to consider? It's a bit of a dangerous slope down to expropriation. But I wanted to put it out there as something to consider and to think about. I'm not saying that it is the direction that I think that we have to go, but I wanted to put it out there. And the other one that I wanted to see if staff wanted to comment on was inclusionary zoning. Is that a direction we should be considering in our zoning or official plan?
Mayor, through you to inclusionary zoning is always, it's been a bit of a tricky issue over the last probably decade or so, because with the change in provincial governments, there was inclusionary zoning that was implemented by the provincial government at one point, and then it was retracted by that same government. Inclusionary zoning, what it means is that you would have certain requirements that if you're going to build a development, just for people in the gallery, that for affordable housing, for example, you would have a certain number of units that would be required to be to meet a certain target for affordability. And right now, the current provincial policies in respect to that is it only allows that type of zoning in areas where the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing has specifically identified them, and that's only in around transit areas. And basically, it's just around transit areas in general is where they've allowed that to happen. That would require, really, from a legislative perspective, a more expansive view by the province to allow it, to put that back in place again. Maybe it's something we need to talk to the province about. It's been a pretty front and center topic of discussion around all of our considerations for housing over the last half a dozen years. But investigating that, implementing those sorts of things into our own policies and zoning, I would only caution that without that legislative backing behind it, it becomes difficult for to give it any teeth. You know, you can put it into your policies, but if someone doesn't want to do it, makes a change, you don't really have any leg to stand on to stop that from happening. So certainly we can look at those things. But I think you know, the first step, I think, is the legislative part of it. I don't know if you had anything to, no, thanks. Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to ask it because when we looked at that housing continuum, the housing continuum is very complex. And if we don't, you know, mandate action within every aspect of that housing continuum, we'll create a bottleneck somewhere that we may never be able to break down. And so that's why I asked the question.
So I think we've captured that note too. And I think to your earlier comment about, I'm not sure if this fits here, don't let the format of the sections that we're working on limit our creativity in this part. I think, you know, we can sort out those details afterwards if the ideas are coming. I think that's the most important thing that staff is looking for from this conversation, is to just, you know, let's think wild and big, and we'll sort out those details, you know, as we refine those thoughts. But this is intended to be a, you know, sort of a free flowing conversation. Councillor Rutherford.
Just because Councillor Martin asked about inclusionary zoning, when I was at AMO, I sat in on a session. It was called the Evolving Provincial Housing Framework. And Drulo Holdings was one of the speakers, and they referred to PUD zoning, PUD, which stands for the Planned Unit Development Zone. So I guess I was just interested your thoughts on that. I had reached out to Mr. Miller after that conference, and it looks as though Woodstock's moved a little bit away through that. But just because you asked about inclusionary zoning, I wanted to bring that up too.
Your worship, through you to that question, yes, we do have planned unit developments, or PUD zoning as we refer to it. It's a kind of funny word, but nonetheless, you don't forget it. So that's one thing that's good about it. But yeah, it was employed. We have utilized it in the city of Woodstock. We haven't put it into new developments. Our experience, you know, from just using it for the 20 odd years that I've been here at the city of Woodstock, because it got implemented back in the 90s, is that it was really intended to be employed in areas where you're going to have planned development, the entire development itself. So if you look up in the northwest section of the city, for example, the what we call the Sally Creek subdivisions, that was initially intended to be kind of a fully planned single kind of entity type of a community. And that zoning was identified as being something that would implement that, and it helped to streamline some of the things we've talked about here today, get away from actually having to deal with specific zoning provisions and be able to have more of a, you know, for lack of a better word, some negotiated approach to how building form would take place. The experience is that for single detached dwelling neighborhoods, it doesn't work very well at all. It's more of a pain. It's the opposite of streamlining. It really slows stuff down. But there certainly has been some, you know, for some of the commercial developments, some of the higher density, and those things that you want to plan more collectively. Like if you had a number of units or a number of buildings, higher density buildings, and integrated with parks and other things, you know, there's certainly some opportunity there to continue to implement that type of a zoning.
So if I can continue, then for the potential higher density targets out on the other side of Juliana by the 401, if you made that all PUD zoning, would that advance? Like, would that be a tool to help us in this case? I'm just throwing an example out there to understand it.
I think, again, your worship's view to that question is that typically, you know, because those types of developments are actually happening on a site specific kind of basis, like the apartment building at the corner of Juliana and Lampman, I think it is, you know, you're usually identifying all the provisions you need to identify inside of that. But in a more general sense, I would say that's the sort of thing that you would apply that type of approach to in zoning, as opposed to the more single detached, semi-detached stuff.
So can we put a sticky note with PUD on it? Oh, perfect. Sorry. Thank you so much for that answer.
Marachioni?
If I can actually add on Councillor Leatherborough's, is there simplifications with the zoning, speaking, like going back to the basics of the R1, R2 and other zones like that, that would play into PUD? Because I'm not that familiar with that. Yeah, if you could forward me that, that'd be great. But, you know, just recognizing provincial policies becoming more clear every day, that like an R1 and R2, in my opinion anyways, certainly not a planner, they don't look to be much different anymore. So would that simplify by just eliminating that?
Yeah, through your worship, through to your question, I think you still want zoning that, you know, you want to make sure you're accomplishing the things you want to accomplish in terms of making sure you're providing you know, appropriate building envelope, providing room for off-site parking, providing amenity space on your properties. And, you know, the zoning tools that we have in place now for our, like the kind of the standard for those lower density types of housing, I think it worked pretty well. It's not to say you couldn't move away from that, but certainly in terms of streamlining, I don't think that's really been the issue. What I was suggesting in my earlier presentation was that you may be able to take some, but we already do it right now with your, what we call the R1 zone, which primarily only allows single detached dwellings. And we have provisions inside that zone for different size properties based on their frontage. And you could kind of extend that to include maybe the R2 zone to say, okay, we can build that into one kind of a single zoning that has provisions for certain lot sizes inside of it that gives guidance but my experience is we put that in the bylaw when the current bylaw was adopted in 2010. And, you know, I don't want to speak on behalf of the building department here, but my experience seems to be that I think that kind of approach has worked pretty well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, anything else around zoning or the official plan? Is there anything that was on the stickies that members of council had questions about or concerns with? We can bring that back up again. So here's the ones that we've added for now. And again, if ideas come to us after the fact, feel free to send them our way. Really, it's about making sure that staff has information so that we can develop the strategies that we want to identify in the housing pledge to bring back to council for consideration. So seeing nothing else on this topic, we'll move into service levels. And again, to Maraccione's point around the parking in existing neighborhoods, you know, we had this conversation as we were preparing some of this information, looking at the fact that in some cases, you know, a service level versus the bylaw regulation, it may touch on both of those things, which is, you know, potentially the case in that example. So recognizing that, you know, it's not always a discrete strategy necessarily or a tool that they may have two sides to a coin. So in terms of service levels, some of the areas that we had identified as buckets to look at this under is parking, transit, and staffing. So for parking, again, looking at exploring new initiatives or changes to parking that support increased density in residential neighborhoods. So for example, some examples of this might be year-round parking permits, alternate side on-street parking, and increasing bylaw staff for enforcement. In transit, enhanced or expanded transit service. And I think Councillor Martin, you mentioned that earlier today as well. And then from staffing, again, addressing some of the concerns that we'd heard previously about making sure that we've got enough staff resources to support development approvals, building permits, things like that. So looking to turn it over to council at this stage to see if there's any service level considerations or improvements that that we want to identify as tools to help us increase density. Councilor Otter?
Thank you. I certainly can support parking on one side of the street or changing it month to month. I think that would be a little hard for people to remember to do it. So I think that more clarity would be to park on one side of the street. But that would satisfy me a bit. So yeah, I'll leave it there. And I'm sorry, I do have to leave. I have to do something for the art gallery. But I'm certainly going to be reading the rest of it. Thanks. Thank you.
Right. All right. I don't know if I'm sharing my screen there or not. So, so that covers service levels. Nothing added there. We talked about parking. Moving now on to streamlining and simplifying. This is more of in a lot of cases, processes or information. So I'll zoom in and review these ones. So review current planning and development approval processes to identify opportunities for further streamlining. So for examples of this would be updating the updated pre-consultation process, sorry. Further delegation of approvals to staff in some cases, potential benefits of looking at that community planning permit system. Another one could be, or that's already in progress, is increasing capacity within specialized technical skill sets to improve housing supply tracking and monitoring. And so this is something that the county is working on, increasing their staff capacity and making sure that some of these documents are up to date so that it can help facilitate the timely approval of development. Requesting that the province establish a single approval authority for all planning applications and matters. So things that require an official plan amendment, a subdivision, and consent to sever approval would still require consideration by the City of Woodstock as well as Oxford County Councils. Consider the creation of an intensification facilitator position as a single point of contact within the building department. This would allow us to focus on supporting smaller scale intensification applications. So things like ARU applications, conversion of existing buildings or properties to multi-unit residential. So I think, again, I can't remember, apologies, who had suggested that idea, but just helping to facilitate and guide people through that process if they're looking to increase density. Requesting the province that they reassign decision-making authority, including the budget approvals for water and wastewater infrastructure, to the City of Woodstock so that we can streamline development, review, and approval to accelerate the development of new homes. Request the province to introduce a new intake under the Streamlined Development Approval Fund for municipalities in the second tranche of housing pledges. So this is a program that was previously only offered to 39 of the largest municipalities in the province. And again, another one that's in development currently is develop information materials to increase property owner understanding of incentive programs and processes for smaller scale intensification. So supporting the work of potentially that intensification facilitator if council wanted to go in that direction. This would just be those tools and resources and guides that would help provide information to residents and property owners on how to go through these processes. So again, I will turn this back over to council for your thoughts and ideas. If there's any that you are particularly interested in pursuing, any that you have concerns with, or any additional ways that you can think of to streamline or simplify some of these processes. That's mine.
Thank you. Just some clarification on request the province to establish a single approval authority for planning applications and matters. In a two-tier system, how do we envision that happening?
Oh, Mr. Curry.
Your worship, through Councillor Martin, that currently official plans of subdivision and even consents are brought before City of Woodstock Council. In most cases, because there are more than, there's also a zoning application component to it as well. And they're deliberated on and approved and or recommended for approval in the case of the official plan piece and the plan of subdivision piece to county council, who is the decision-making authority for those pieces. So it requires two-step process. So we have a public meeting here. Our council has to make a decision, and then it proceeds to the county, where again, the county council has to make a decision. With respect to plans of subdivision, the province has mandated somewhat of a streamlining in the sense that plans of subdivision do not require public meetings anymore. And so it doesn't require a committee of the whole public meeting at county council, but it still requires a decision of county council. So this would be a recommendation that simply the City of Woodstock Council is the approval authority, and it's a one window source of your approval authority for the planning applications that occur within the City of Woodstock.
Unless it needs an official plan amendment?
Your worship, Councilor Martin, it would be unless the authority for official plan was also transferred to the City of Woodstock, and then it would not need two levels of approval at all. So I think if you look at the list of municipalities that are in the current housing target, housing pledge, I think we're probably the only municipality that's left with a two-tier planning approval system, because all of the other larger municipalities within regional governments have decisions of the province to transfer that decision-making authority to the area municipality.
So I'll state I'm not comfortable with that.
We touched on it very briefly before, and I can't remember who touched on it before either, but mixed uses. Is there a way to streamline that process at all, to recognize the other ways we can intensify and use other commercial properties for housing and everything else? I'm not sure if this is the right spot, but mixed use, I think, would be a more efficient way to use some of our properties already. Yeah.
Your worship, yeah, we identified that as one of the kind of the quick and dirty things that we could do I mean, there's certainly some opportunities already in the current policies that reflect that, but there's certainly, if you're going to target areas for that or certain designations, then some easy changes to the policies to encourage that would be in order.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further on streamlining or simplifying? That's what I did.
Just to go back to what Councillor Martin had said, couldn't we change that to be, requesting to the province to, stabilize and support, again, like the building department engineering, before asking for single approval authority? Like, wouldn't it make more sense to make sure we have enough bodies and things like that to do so before shifting direction?
Your worship, through to Councillor Leatherbear, they're really two different things, in the sense that the building department staff are on the actual building permit processing, the whole, the issuance of the building permit, the building inspections during the construction. And, we'd certainly think there's a role for the province to play in advocating for training programs to get more youth being trained in the profession of being a building inspector. There's simply not enough coming through the college technical programs to meet the demands of municipalities right now. It is one of those technical skills that is very lacking, and it's many municipalities are finding it very difficult to recruit for this expertise. So with respect to the approvals, that's more of just a streamline. The fact that if there's something being developed within the city of Woodstock, it's the elected officials of the city of Woodstock who are rendering the decision on that planning application, and not the county councillors, who 7 of which were not elected representatives of the city of Woodstock. So it's that piece, plus the whole streamlining of the extra time associated with going for that secondary approval.
I'm seeing no other comments on this section, so I'll bring that back up. Oh. So I'll bring this back up and see, and noting that the feedback that we received is captured. Next section is financial. And so some of the opportunities are exploring grant and incentive programs to increase affordable housing, whether I guess that's through a CIP. an existing or in progress action is cash in lieu of parking. I believe this is the right color sticky for this one, for development within a defined area within proximity of the downtown. And consider the development of a brownfields community improvement program to encourage repurposing of formal commercial and industrial buildings for residential where it's appropriate. Programs could include things like grants for feasibility studies or environmental site assessment studies. So those are some of the potential financial tools or strategies that could be put in place and included in the housing pledge. And I'll turn it over to council for thoughts and feedback in this section. Councilor Wismer Van Meer.
I'm not sure who to ask. Maybe Mr. Creary, the cash in lieu of parking option for development. What does that look like? I mean, maybe for the general public and folks here in the gallery who might not understand what that all is proposing. Would you be able to just explain that a bit for us?
Sure, Your Worship, through Councillor Wismer Van Meer. The cash in lieu of parking is a bylaw of the city of Woodstock that allows a development proposal to not supply the required parking under the zoning bylaw, and instead, through cash in lieu of parking, essentially pay to the city a portion of the cost of developing a brand new parking space so that the city can use those funds to develop and expand the downtown parking permit system, and therefore supply the parking that's required for that development within our public parking system. So this is very geographically specific to the downtown. Cash in lieu of is only available within Schedule D of the zoning bylaw, which is it's essentially the community improvement plan area. So it's the central business district plus the entrepreneurial area. And so there is a suggestion that perhaps we need to review and regularize this very irregular Schedule D that dances around specific properties around the downtown. But essentially, we're providing the parking in the public parking system, and it's something that we can certainly consider with. We allow overnight parking in only certain public parking lots to support the residents who live in the upper floors of Dundas Street businesses. We can look at expanding those overnight parking permissions to a greater number of our public parking lots in the downtown. We can look at creating a resident parking permit, for example, to encourage more residential development in the downtown that's not going to require parking and will make use of the public parking assets that we currently have. So these are all ideas that we can look at to leverage what we've got in a better way.
No other comments on this section? Oh, yes.
Sorry, and please correct me if I'm totally out of line here, but I do see, again, incentivize, grants. What about on the opposite end of some type of penalty for those that are choosing not to be incentivized and cleaning up their properties, all of those things that I've said a few times today, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm a team player and I want to help people, re-outfit their building and things like that. But when we're in a housing crisis and we see so many units just vacant for a very, very long time, I'm just trying to figure out what is the flip side rather than us saying, here is the carrot in front of you. We will support you when that's not happening, especially for people that aren't living in the city of Woodstock or Oxford County for that matter. So if I'm out of line, it's only brainstorming, but when do you draw the line to say that we've done enough incentivizing and we also could perhaps hold people accountable and so on? I'm looking at you, Mr. Mayor.
If I may comment on that, I mean, I agree with that 100%. especially thinking of some of the businesses downtown that do have some issues with their landlords, typically when they live out of town, that interest isn't there. So of course, I mean, I think that's a brilliant idea and something we have talked about for a little bit of different ways to do things.
Okay, so I think we've captured that sticky. So that's great. In terms of the next section, was infrastructure specifically related to tool strategies or initiatives. Starts with an I. I don't know that staff had come up with any specifically, so if council has any thoughts on what that some of those might be. I mean, certainly we've heard a lot today around some of the considerations related to infrastructure. There was anything that we wanted to capture here as a sticky?
If I may, I guess, in relations to some concerns, I think most of us share with ARUs, the infrastructure of, your water lines and, wastewater and capacities and, say in an R1 zone that was never designed to have up to 3 units. Obviously there's going to be a much higher demand. So I think under up infrastructure, we should have some kind of sticky there, to highlight any possible areas maybe where they are concerns. Some of the, say, maybe older areas of Woodstock that we haven't replaced lines. Maybe they should be part of those discussions before we allow ARUs there. Roadways have to be redone, new sewers put in, et cetera, et cetera. If that's the right spot or not, I'm not sure, but that is a thought.
Yeah, so I think we've captured that comment. I don't know if Mr. Curry had anything to add to that. If not,
The only thing I think I had to add is that I think we heard from council in the visioning session that council's looking in terms of, if you think of infrastructure broadly, and not the hard services, that council was looking that to ensure that there's sufficient services to support the needs of the growing population in the form of childcare, healthcare, doctors. So not necessarily city services, but services to support the families of a bigger population. And then secondly, we heard that council was wanting to ensure that the city's infrastructure in the form of fire halls, police assets, recreation facilities, keeps step with the growing population as well.
I would just add on top of that too, just the satellite piece. And again, because we're in brainstorming, I think of like where Cowan soccer fields is, if there was some type of satellite of like your EMS, fire, police, like it doesn't have to be, the $10 million building for just one. It's really looking at our infrastructure existing and then down the road to make sure that we are using it as max capacity as possible. As well as, again, I think the County of Oxford has a great role to play with, something like Woodingford. Is there space there for childcare spaces down the road? That's just an example. But really getting the best bang for your buck and looking where this growth is going to continue to make sure, yes, the services are there, but that satellite piece that we don't do kind of the old method of like, it has to be so big for one purpose. It has to be multifaceted because our community is going to continue to be multifaceted too. So just adding to that.
was Councilor Wisdom-Rivenmere?
Not sure how we necessarily word this, but under infrastructure, I think of pedestrian safety and measures that are taken along those lines. And when we're talking about having a growing population and students having to walk to and from school, lack of buses, it doesn't even matter what your radius is of where you live. If there's not a bus driver and a bus to take you, you're getting there. So I think keeping that in mind in the process is almost as important as transit in that aspect.
So I'll pull that back up. So we've captured some of those. Oh, sorry, Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, when I think of infrastructure, I do think of water and wastewater, but I also think of things like neighborhood parks. So I don't know if the CAO can give us maybe a closer example as to where he thinks by 2031, where things like development charges go for municipalities, whether that be cities our size versus cities the size of Toronto or cities the size of Embro, towns the size of Embro, where development charges might go for new residential, whether it be a single family home versus whether it be a 10-story apartment building.
Your worship, through to Councillor Sandberg, and are you speaking about the dollar value of the development charge?
Yeah, I
Or-
believe exactly that. And I think one of the things, for example, Councillor Tate would always say to sort of say, well, residential can't pay for itself or doesn't pay for itself based on development charges and the cost for the infrastructure of water and storm sewers and things that have to go along with it, whether it be a fire hall or whether it be a community park.
So the premise, the principle, I guess, is that growth pays for growth. And development charges is a very prescribed methodology for how you derive what the dollars are per dwelling unit, regardless of the type of the dwelling unit. And you cannot collect development charges for a greater level of service than what you currently deliver in the municipality. So you can't Cadillac the cost of recreation services, for example, for the growth, unless you can prove that that is what you are currently delivering in your historical 10-year service level. And this is all measured on the value of your capital assets for this particular, whatever it is you're developing the charge for. So development charges are designed to capture the cost of growth. So I don't want to contradict Councillor Tate. There are exemptions, statutory exemptions to development charges. You've been able to add 1 or 2 residential dwelling units within an existing dwelling unit without paying development charges for years as a statutory exemption. Now the province has come along and said you can't collect development charges for an ARU, which is the additional residential unit, which really, really neither here nor there, because there was the statutory exemption anyways. The province came along and required a across the board cut for the quantum of our development charges. So they're currently at 80% of the historical funding levels, and each year they up another 5%. So starting in January 1, we'll be at 85%. So the province prescribed that. So in that context, yes, we are not at 100% cost of growth, but it's by provincial mandate at this point, and it's a response to the current housing crisis, and it's a requirement of municipalities to reduce these for this 5-year period to help encourage more housing development. I think that what Councillor Tate is reflecting correctly on is that residential development is the development that burdens the tax levy the greatest. If you compare residential development to industrial development and commercial development or institutional development, it is the residential development that commands all of the municipal services. It commands the service levels. An industry doesn't require the municipality to build a library or a pool or an arena. And these are the costly things. But it is the people who live in your community, it is the residential tax base that commands those assets, those costs, and that is what creates the greater burden, the greater tax levy. So more people living here commands more facilities and more cost, but you also have more assessment to spread that tax base over. So hope that helps.
Thank you. To follow up on that, then, under infrastructure, and I guess under the category before of financial, do we not need to identify our industrial and our commercial growth targets as a high priority in order to make our housing strategy and our housing targets feasible?
Your worship, through to Councillor Martin, the county is currently going through a development charge exercise. So there is a forecast for employment land growth that is currently being refreshed. The county will also undertake a comprehensive review soon to take a look at our growth forecast going forward, both in terms of residential as well as industrial and commercial. Generally speaking, the industrial and the commercial are more difficult to estimate. You have to kind of look at historical trends. Commercial development will go wherever you have the population that exists to support their service or business. Industrial can be more fickle. They will go where the raw materials for whatever they produce exist, and wherever there's the employees with the technical skills to support their needs. So they will locate on those parameters more than anything.
I think what I heard there, that there's a desire to identify some targets, but you're suggesting that perhaps it's a little bit more difficult and that might come as a result of some of this increased housing, but perhaps we can make a note of that so that we've got that captured as staff takeaway, the input and feedback. So we've captured some of those thoughts and have gone back up to some of the financial pieces there. So just to catch people up in terms of where we're at, we have other, which admittedly is a large one with lots of stickies. And then we're going into our final exercise. So we are the bulk of the way through the agenda, but I expect that this one will probably have some interesting conversation as well. So we'll look at these ones. So these were things that didn't fit into our other categories. And this is other considerations that might be relevant to recognize or identify in the pledge. So some things that potentially we might not have control over, but maybe dependency, like the ability to achieve our targets may be dependent on. So things that staff have identified as potential opportunities are encouraging the province to assist municipalities in negotiating boundary adjustments to require as a result of the fact that we're required to maintain a minimum 25-year land supply. That the province recognize addressing housing crisis as a shared responsibility and therefore identify annual targets for developers, home builders, other community partners, as well as accountability measures and metrics to ensure that the building of homes in a timely manner once development approvals are in place. So I think we've heard a little bit about that from members of council today, touching on some of that concept. That the province commits to building supporting institutions, including schools, hospitals, daycares. Again, we've heard this today. That the province look at and overcome delays related to reviewing and issuing permits within provincial ministries. So if they're looking at expansions of roads through the Ministry of Transportation, some things around the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and then mandate maximum response time so that we've got some clarity around what we can expect for timely return of applications. That the province supports associated funding for healthcare workers, paramedics, and public health and social services so that they can accommodate that increased growth in population. That the province revert to the provincial policy statement definition of affordable housing for both home ownership and rental housing. That the province recognizes that servicing land for development without any guarantee of the timing or extent of the development associated collection of those development charges is risky for municipalities, and then should therefore the province should help municipalities by providing some of that funding and infrastructure upfront to mitigate that risk. That the province funds and expedites approval for necessary infrastructure, including water supply, wastewater treatment plants. that the province increase funding for affordable and supportive housing projects to address the critical shortage across the province, which would include funding of new units as well as ongoing support services. That the province addresses supply chain shortages and gaps as well as interest rates and inflation that impacts the housing market and market decisions by home builders. And that the city continue to monitor and implement initiatives outlined in the housing pledge through the data that's derived from the development approvals process, and that will continue to report as necessary to both council and the province. So thank you for your patience as I read through all of those for clarity. And I will turn it back over to council for comments, thoughts, ideas. Councillor Schattenberg.
I guess first of all, just say, I guess a point of clarification is what I seek. That third one that talks about the province committing to more long-term care facilities. There's obviously very different levels of home long-term care facilities. Which of any would qualify as a residential unit? For example, Oxford Gardens is very independent living, almost apartment living, versus other stages of life that wouldn't. Do we get credit for one of the 5,500 units for certain levels within a long-term care facility?
I would look to you, the planning staff, Mr. Green.
Yes, I do believe that we get credit for those could be considered as dwelling units if they are constructed in this period of time, yes.
I think the intent of that was similar to what council had identified earlier today, though, is just that there is a need for, as we increase the population, for some of these supporting services. So it was less potentially about, although it sounds like it does give us credit for those spots in some cases, it was more about recognizing that need for those other services. Councilor Leatherberg?
I'm not comfortable with the first one. Encourage the province to assist municipalities in negotiations for boundary adjustments that are required to maintain a minimum 25-year land supply for new housing. Specifically because in the spring when we had the EZT boundary adjustment chat before us, I voted against calling the province to come and assist. So not sure how my peers feel about that, but I think it looks like bad business with our neighbors, which is what I said a few months ago. And I just don't see it being a priority in all of the other good things that we've highlighted today.
Thank you.
I would add, in fact, the motion was passed to not pursue that. I'm not 100% sure understanding what these stickies, how they fit into the pledge, because I look at most of these as advocacy work, that they will be ongoing discussions, and City of Woodstock is not the only municipality that has these ongoing discussions with the province. It's WOWC and it's SCORE and it's the Community School Alliance. Lots of groups are having these conversations. So how does this fit in with what we're trying to accomplish today? I was struggling because we're asking the province to do things that they're not interested in doing.
I think that's probably why they're under other. They're not really one specific area in particular, but it still recognizes the need. You go to Councillor Leatherborough's comment about encourage province to assist municipalities. You know, you can't have the province coming at you and telling you to have a 25-year supply when you don't, right? I think the county even said we're 11 years, I believe, forecasted right now we would have left until we're completely built out. So again, not saying this is necessarily our priority as a council, but it's still got to be identified as something that isn't there. If they're requiring us to have 25 years, we simply don't. So how does somebody go about something if it's a requirement when we don't have it? So again, doesn't have to be our priority. In fact, it'll probably be next council's issue really to deal with, because I think we've been very clear in our priorities to build up what area we do have, intensifying and doing everything we can, but we still can't forget for future councils, they're going to at one point be done with all land here in the city completely. So it's got to be recognized that as a municipality, we don't have any capacity to be close to that 25-year time frame. If that makes sense.
It does. I get what you're saying, but I don't understand why it has to stay on. Like, if it's not a priority for us now, if it's a down the road, we had that vote about EZT boundary adjustment, which I think is the exact wording. So I'm just saying maybe we take it off.
We're still identifying issues though. That's still an issue that isn't gonna go away. It's still council's choice if we want to look at, where we go as a direction. Council's been clear on that direction, but it's still an issue moving forward that I think does need to be identified.
And I think, again, these were put for part of the discussion, so not necessarily. And so I'm hearing that that one is not something that council would be interested in seeing move forward. So that's great. Councillor Wismer Van Meer.
Just to kind of carry on from what Councillor Leatherbarrow said, is there not room to, advocate to the province to not implement these boundaries adjustments and reevaluate what your land supply has to look like based on what you have developed and where you're at, instead of pushing boundary adjustments? Is that not something, I realize that we are very much under the guidance of what the provincial government says, but is there not a way to start to push back on that, saying we have run out of space, we don't have the ability to do these boundary adjustments if our neighboring communities aren't comfortable with that? Is there not a way to start going, pushing back against that? I don't know how else to word it politely, I guess.
Thank you for that.
So for council's benefit, much of this section relates to one of the elements of a housing pledge is to identify barriers to implementation. So things that are outside of our control. And so when you see some of these stickies talking about advocacy to the province, it's because this council doesn't have the approval authority for new schools or for long-term care, or for things that emanate from the development of new housing. So the particular sticky related to the boundary adjustment is here in the context of it being a barrier, in the sense that the housing target is 5,500 units. As you saw in an earlier slide, the estimated number of units that the current geography of the city of Woodstock will support is about 5,600 to 5,700. And so if the initiatives produce the desired result of 5,500 units by 2031, we will be out of land. And so it will force intensification internal to the city, but there will be no further developability. If there isn't a boundary adjustment in this term of council, the next earliest date for a boundary adjustment, given an election in 2026, would be January 1 of 2028. Which bumps into 2031 in the sense that it takes, 3 to 5 years to bring land from an agricultural state to shovel readiness for development state. So land supply gets very tight. When land supply gets very tight, affordability goes in the wrong direction. And so you have this this issue of you will create outcomes that are not desirable.
Anything further on this topic? Councillor Schadenberg?
I just noticed on your chart, you've got that point number 1 in a gray box now. Does that mean it's kind of 50-50, kind of in there or not in there?
I just changed it to gray to reflect this conversation so that we don't lose sight of it when we're reviewing that.
So again, it's just an internal note so that we can reflect the feedback that we heard from council today.
All right, I was just gonna state that we got two large subdivisions on the north side of Piddock, not to create this boundary adjustment discussion this afternoon, of which neither one of these have any kind of a commercial component whatsoever to them. And we've already got how many houses already built on the north side of Piddock without any commercial component, shopping malls. Doesn't matter if it's a beer store and a liquor store, doesn't matter what it is. So for anybody to think that even an extremely modest boundary adjustment in East Or Tavistock is not necessary is being rather blind. And the other one, the box doesn't say anything about East Or Tavistock. I mean, what doesn't, but it does also doesn't say anything about Norwich Township or Southwest Oxford or Blandford Blenheim for that matter either. So who's to say specifically that any kind of residential increase for a 25-year land supply even has to be East Or Tavistock?
So again, I think this has been helpful, discussion to help inform staff's, taking this away and bringing back strategies to include in the housing pledge that will reflect council's interests. Because our goal again is to bring that housing pledge back to council at the December 14th meeting. So if there isn't anything at this time on those tools, strategies, and initiatives that we've just gone through, we'll move to that one too, the wrong section. The final activity, which is again just kind of a final. Sorry, thank you. I will remember to share my screen again. Sorry, let me get back to the Zoom meeting. Sorry, just lost my meeting. Okay, so the final activity for today is just again an opportunity for kind of final reflection and final thoughts from council. So is there anything, and I think I'll let you speak for it. Is there anything that we talked about today that you can't support if you saw it in Woodstock's housing pledge? Are there dependencies or external factors? Those are some of the examples that were in the other section that we want to identify in that housing pledge that might help us or prevent us from achieving our target. So again, I'll turn it over to council for making sure that we've got that captured in this section here.
I don't have to restate what I obviously don't like in this, right? We got it? Perfect.
I just want to acknowledge that one of my greatest concerns collectively throughout all of this is this has the potential to have an enormous impact on the tax burden for all residents. Whether we grow by 55 houses or 5,500 housing units in 2 years or 20 years, the needs of growth will have an enormous impact. So I just want to make sure that we're all perfectly aware as counselors and the public that this comes at a tremendous cost. It also comes with tremendous opportunity, but it comes at tremendous cost. And I just want to make sure that we're aware of that.
Mayor Shearing?
Just again, I'll add to that I think everybody has seen after COVID, the supply and demands of what rises prices and what lowers with all items. It's not just simply housing, but what we're talking about today. Without a ready supply, prices go way out of whack. So I think we have to realize that. And I think where we're concentrating on not just single family homes as prior history of the city of Woodstock is primarily focused on. I think now, I think we're in the right direction of looking at you know, things like the ARUs and simply apartment buildings and heights and, you know, where we can build higher instead of so many floors. Let's keep going up. I mean, nobody's going to tell us not to except for ourselves and policies. So let's be realistic and looking at that, yeah, instead of a 3-story or a 4-story, I mean, we can double it to an 8-story and get double the housing. So reality is we can control that as a council, in my opinion, by looking at a lot of things we've identified today.
So yeah, I will bring this back up. And just for clarity, again, we don't want to make any decisions and put words into council's mouth, but just for clarity, based on the previous discussions, it sounds like a couple of the stickies that need to be brought down into this section as initiatives that council is not comfortable supporting or prepared to support is the one that you moved to gray under the other about the 25-year boundary adjustment. So that can be brought down into this section. Looking for someone to flag that as a not okay. And then the other one was the planning authority, single planning authority. I think we heard that council had expressed concerns with seeing that reflected in the pledge. Mayor Chioni?
Yeah, I'm gonna add the planning authority. I'm still in favor of the idea of simplifying. Again, every time we have to eliminate developers going in front of a council for more decisions, I think that's a fairly easy one. In this context, I think the way it was brought up, it's not talking about not using county staff, it's just talking about one less step in that whole entire process. County staff are still going to give us that information. County staff is still going to be involved with everything they do, but just that authority that whatever our council wishes is done. And again, a developer knows they can come here, speak with counselors, answer their questions instead of going now to another council who may or may not go to another bunch of counselors that don't have the involvement we do as a council with those decisions. I've said it at county council many times that what Tilsonburg, for example, wants to do in their city, I'm not sure I should have a final say all the time in what they do. If that council's been unanimous on a decision and it's not unanimous at county, I've always had an issue with that. You know, they know their residents and everything else. They should have that authority. And this is what I'm looking at this point that was brought up earlier, that again, we're not talking about anything really changing much except for one less council meeting. And those fears and those delays and that red tape we keep saying we want to eliminate. So why are we not looking at that, I guess?
Pardon?
So I'll just point out an example, not too long ago, I believe in this term of council, that it was actually action taken, no, it was in the last term of council, action taken by Oxford County Council that allowed for the intensification, higher intensification of a project here within the city that would not have happened without that action. So, and that's the development at the intersection of Main and Wellington. So the 2-tier system, the official plan resides at the county level, and it is the responsibility of Oxford County Council to weigh in on official plan decisions. I don't think a 2, 3, 5-week time frame between a city council planning meeting and a county council planning meeting is the barrier to implementation in the grand scheme of our housing pledge.
If I can add to that, the point is it's not helping. I don't really believe there is a purpose to have another meeting at another council. The whole point is trying to streamline. That's what it was under. Hence why, if we can eliminate 3 to 5 weeks, as you mentioned, then why wouldn't we want to look at that? That's all. That's why I would still keep it included.
Is there anything else that council wishes to see captured here? Otherwise, we've got certainly a lot to take away. We'll circulate some feedback as well on this. And if anything comes to mind sort of after the fact, certainly you can reach out to staff and we'll capture this. Again, this was not about making decisions. This was about presenting some information to council for review and discussion and feedback and input so that we could have a good understanding of where your minds are at, what you'd like to see included in the housing pledge. And so I think that's what today has been about and has been, I think, helpful. And yeah, so if there's nothing further, I will turn it back over to Mr. Curry.
Thank you. I just, I want to thank council for walking through this with us today. We have the task of building the housing pledge ahead of us. If you have any further thoughts, ideas, or if members of the public have come forward with anything, please share that with staff. We will consider that as we work to draft the housing pledge for council's consideration. Over to you, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to thank everyone as well. This is, again, being collaborative, making sure we all do have a voice in this. I think it's been relatively clear where we're all unanimous and we're not all unanimous. Fair that to say that. I want to thank the general public for being here, of course, to listen to this. I will say, if you'd like to send any comments, good, bad, or ugly, as the saying goes, send it to clerks info. So that's CLERKSINFO at cityofwoodstock.ca. And the clerk's department will send that forward to all of council for consideration. So when that time does come to, as we're piecing that together, we'll have that information from the general public. And now if there's nothing else, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Wismer Van Meer, seconded by Councillor Leatherborough. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.